Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are venturing into a world that exists just beyond the edges of our mainstream culture, a world that often remains unseen. We're going behind closed doors into the realm of esotericism. So let's begin with a question that's really fundamental to the human experience. Why are we so fascinated by secrets? What is it about what happens behind closed doors that captures our imagination so completely? It's a curiosity that seems to be woven into the very fabric of who we are. I mean, just think about these names: the Freemasons, the Knights Templar, the Illuminati. They all evoke this sense of mystery, don't they? A feeling of hidden power, of a special kind of knowledge, gnosis, that's reserved only for a select few. These are the central currents we're going to explore. All right, let's dive right in. To really understand any of this, we first have to grapple with the foundational role of secrecy itself. You see, it's not merely about hiding things. It's about the power of concealment to create a distinct world, one with a very clear inside and an outside. You know, this idea of having an inner teaching, an esoteric one, and an outer, more common teaching, an exoteric one, is anything but new. As this quote from the 2nd century thinker Clement of Alexandria shows, the concept has ancient roots. It creates a deliberate division between the initiated, those on the inside, and the profane, or the ordinary, outside world. So it's really important to get this straight. When we talk about esotericism in an academic sense, it's not just a fancy word for secrets. It's a specific category of knowledge. It refers to the historical currents and ideas that were actively pushed to the margins, rejected by the dominant rationalist way of thinking that really took hold after the Enlightenment. Now, if you look at the heart of almost all of these esoteric traditions, you'll find a single profoundly transformative process: initiation. This is the very doorway that leads from the outer profane world into the inner sacred one. And look, this is so much more than just joining a club. Thinkers like the great historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, described initiation as a profound death and rebirth. The key here is that it's an ontological shift. That means it's a fundamental change in an individual's very state of being. You don't just learn something new, you become something new. The Masonic initiation ceremony is a perfect illustration of this journey. The process begins with the candidate shedding their profane self. This is symbolized by being stripped of all metal objects, which represent worldly wealth and ambition. Then, they undergo a symbolic death, where their old identity is ritually brought to an end. And finally, they are resurrected, reborn with a new identity within a sacred tradition. So as you can probably imagine, this esoteric way of knowing creates a fundamental tension, a real conflict with the rational, scientific worldview that dominates so much of our culture today. It's a clash over the most basic question: how do we know what's true? And this really gets to the core of the conflict. It's a question of what counts as a valid source of knowledge. The academic Hassan Yücel frames it beautifully. Rational epistemology, our mainstream way of thinking, relies on things like perception, reason, and testable evidence. But esoteric epistemology places value on completely different sources, things like dreams, intuition, and personal mystical experiences, things a purely rational framework would often just dismiss out of hand. And you can be sure this esoteric approach has always had powerful critics. The 19th century orator Robert G. Ingersoll, famously known as the Great Agnostic, had a very different take. He argued that what gets called sacred is often just a human invention designed for control. Veils of mystery created by a priestly class to consolidate its own power over the masses. And this table just lays the divide bare. It's like two completely different operating systems for reality. On one side, you have critics like the anarcho-primitivist John Zerzan. He sees symbolic culture and civilization itself as a kind of cultural death march that alienates us from authentic reality. But on the other side, a tradition like Freemasonry sees those very same things, symbols, civilization, time, as the essential tools for humanity's ascent toward enlightenment. Two worlds, indeed. So, how in the world do we make sense of this profound conflict? Well, there's a really powerful academic framework from the scholar Wouter Hanegraaft that gives us a key. And here is the crucial insight. Esotericism isn't just a thing that exists on its own. It's a category, a kind of intellectual container that was essentially created by the dominant culture. It's the label that was applied to all the ideas, practices, and ways of knowing that were cast aside and marginalized by Enlightenment rationality. It is, quite literally, the story of rejected knowledge. Now, if you take that idea and run with it, you arrive at this fascinating concept of a culture, which was proposed by the scholar Christopher Partridge. This theory turns everything on its head. It suggests that these so-called esoteric or occult beliefs are actually way more common, more ordinary than we think. And from this perspective, the truly strange, the truly deviant worldview isn't mysticism. It's the very strict and historically very recent tradition of scientific rationalism. So, this framework of rejection helps us understand why this knowledge is so often hidden away. And there's a fantastic metaphor for this, drawn from the work of Ragnar Benson on caching or hiding weapons. Esoteric traditions, in a very real sense, cache their wisdom. Now, this is where the metaphor becomes so powerful. It reframes secrecy. It's not just about exclusion, it's an act of preservation. Think about it. A resistance fighter buries weapons in a sealed container to protect them from a totalitarian regime. Well, in the same way, an esoteric tradition buries its asset, its gnosis, its sacred knowledge, inside a container, like a symbol or a myth, to protect it from a threat, like dogmatism or the Inquisition. The symbol becomes an airtight vessel for truth, waiting for the right time, the day of need. Okay, let's bring all of this into the present day. For our final section, we're going to see how these ancient patterns are still alive and well, echoing throughout our modern world in ways you might not expect. A perfect place to see this is in the study of eschatological myths. That's a mouthful, but it just means stories about the end of the world. And what you find when you look at them is this incredible continuity, because the myth of the end is almost never just about an ending. It's always about a transformation. I mean, it is remarkable how consistent the underlying structure of these myths is. The ancient archetype of a divine warning about a great flood, well, that evolves into a modern UFO religion's message about an impending planetary disaster. The idea of a purifying plague sent as judgment for a society's moral decay, that theme reappears again and again, even during recent pandemics. And the idea of chosen survivors saved by a higher power, it's the same story, whether it's Noah's family or believers being rescued by UFOs. So, ultimately, what this journey into esotericism reveals is something pretty profound. This isn't just a collection of strange beliefs that got left behind by history. It's an enduring and essential counterpoint to our dominant worldview. And perhaps the truth of the human experience isn't found by choosing one side over the other, but by living in the dynamic creative tension between the two. And that leaves us with one final and maybe a little provocative thought to ponder. If a culture defines itself by the knowledge it chooses to reject, then what about us? What ideas, what beliefs, what ways of knowing does our own modern world choose to place behind closed doors? And what will future historians say was the rejected knowledge of our time?